Millionaire weds, a fake bride to please his dying mother, but her one rule changes everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The sterile smell of antiseptic lingered in the quiet hospital room. Machines beeped steadily, each sound a reminder that time was running out. In the bed, a frail woman with silver hair lay propped up on pillows, her breathing shallow but her eyes still sharp. She reached for her son's hand, her voice a whisper. "Daniel, I just want to see you married before I go." "Oh." Daniel Carter, 32, billionaire CEO of Carter Holdings, stood stiffly by her side. His tailored suit couldn't disguise the weariness in his posture. He had built an empire, but in this room, facing his dying mother, he felt powerless. "Mom," his voice broke for the first time in years. "You don't have to worry about me." But she shook her head, insistent. "Promise me. I need to know you won't be alone." The words cut deeper than any boardroom battle ever had. Outside the window, the New York skyline glowed against the dusk, indifferent to his turmoil. He turned away, jaw clenched, because he didn't know how to tell her the truth. He had no one. No fiancé, no girlfriend, not even someone he trusted enough to bring into this room. That was when the thought struck him, reckless, absurd, but the only way to ease her final days. Hours later, rain pounded the glass of a dim cafe in Brooklyn. Inside, a young woman sat alone with a chipped mug of coffee, staring at a stack of unpaid bills in her bag. Her name was Sophie Miller, a 24-year-old nursing student drowning under tuition debt and eviction notices. She pushed the papers aside, forcing herself to breathe. All she wanted was to finish school and provide for her younger brother. The door opened with a gust of wind, and in walked Daniel Carter. He looked out of place, his dark suit catching the light, his presence commanding even in a humble corner cafe. Sophie glanced up, startled, when he stopped in front of her table. "You don't know me," Daniel began, voice steady but eyes heavy. "But I have a proposition, one that could change both our lives." Her brows furrowed. "Excuse me?" He sat down across from her, leaning in so no one else could hear. "I need a wife, just for a short time. My mother is dying, and her only wish is to see me married. I can't give her that truth, but I can give her an illusion." Sophie blinked, stunned. "You can't be serious. I'll take care of everything, your debts, your housing, your tuition. In exchange, you'll stand by my side as my bride until—" his voice faltered, "until she's gone." She should have laughed, should have walked out of that cafe. But there was something in his eyes, something raw beneath the steel facade. Still, her spine straightened as she set down her mug. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I have one rule. Just one. You respect me. No lies outside this deal, no using me as a prop beyond your mother. If you break that, I walk away." For the first time that night, Daniel's lips curved into the faintest smile. He reached into his briefcase, slid a crisp document across the table, and handed her a pen. "Then let's make this official." And just like that, the contract that would shatter and remake their lives began with ink on paper, and a single rule Sophie never expected would change everything. Rain washed the New York sidewalks clean, but inside Sophie's chest, everything felt tangled and heavy. She stared at the freshly signed contract in her bag as she hurried through the damp streets toward her tiny apartment in Queens. Her shoes were soaked, her rent overdue, her younger brother texting again about overdue school fees. She pushed open the creaking door of her walk-up, where peeling paint and a leaky faucet reminded her that life had never been kind. Her roommate glanced up from the couch. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sophie hesitated. What could she say? That a stranger in a $1,000 suit had walked into a Brooklyn cafe and offered her marriage? That she had said yes? Instead, she forced a shaky smile. Just a long day. She slipped into her room, shut the door, and leaned against it. From her bag, she pulled out the contract again. Black ink on white paper, simple lines that now bound her future. Her eyes stopped at the clause she had insisted on. "Respect me." One rule. That was the only shield she had. She touched the page as if it might burn her, then tucked it under her pillow. Across the city, Daniel Carter stood before the massive windows of his penthouse, the skyline glittering like a field of diamonds. Normally, the view calmed him. Tonight, it pressed down like a weight. He had just tethered himself to a stranger. A waitress, a student, a girl with eyes too honest for her own good. His reflection in the glass looked every bit the ruthless CEO. But for the first time in years, he felt uncertain. He poured a glass of scotch, but it did nothing to quiet the image of Sophie in that cafe wet hair, steady voice, that one condition she had delivered without flinching. If you break that, I walk away. Her strength unsettled him. He was used to negotiations ending with his word. She had dared to draw a line. The following morning, Sophie hurried from her apartment, clutching her worn backpack. She stopped at the corner store to grab a discounted bagel for breakfast, counting coins in her palm. Behind her, a sleek black car pulled up, drawing stares from the neighbors. The driver stepped out and opened the back door. Daniel sat inside, expression unreadable. "Get in," he said simply. Her heart thudded. She slid into the leather seat, feeling wildly out of place. "We need to make this believable," Daniel said, handing her a folder. Inside were photographs, a timeline, details about how they met, favorite colors, vacations they'd supposedly taken. "You're kidding," Sophie muttered, flipping through the fabricated scrapbook. "This is insane. It's necessary. My mother will ask questions. The press will ask more." She swallowed, staring at a photo of them digitally edited together in Paris. It felt surreal, like she'd been inserted into someone else's life. The car slowed in front of a boutique hotel. Sophie blinked. "What are we doing here?" "Transformation," Daniel replied. Inside, a stylist and a team of assistants were waiting. Dresses shimmered on racks. Shoes gleamed under bright lights. Sophie's hands shook as they fitted her in a gown she would never be able to afford, heels that made her stand taller than she felt. When she stepped in front of the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Daniel entered, his gaze sweeping over her. For a moment, the mask of the CEO slipped. "You'll do," he said, voice softer than he intended. Sophie crossed her arms, grounding herself. "Remember the rule," she warned. He met her eyes, something unreadable flickering there. "I don't forget deals." Bah. That night, as the city lights burned outside, two strangers from opposite worlds stood on the edge of a dangerous pact, one bound by duty, the other by desperation. Neither of them realized yet how quickly lines on paper could blur into matters of the heart. And as Sophie tucked herself into bed hours later, makeup washed away, dress folded back into its bag, she whispered to the ceiling, "What have I done?" While across town, Daniel whispered to the night, "What if this is the only way I don't lose her?" The contract had begun, and with it, the slow unraveling of everything they thought they could control. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Morning light streamed through high windows, dust swirling in the beams. Sophie sat stiffly on a wooden bench, her palms damp against the bouquet someone had thrust into her hands. The white dress Daniel's team had chosen for her wasn't extravagant, but compared to her usual thrift store clothes, it felt unreal. Every detail pressed in on her, the hum of the air vent, the echo of footsteps in the hall, the weight of what she had agreed to. Daniel stood at her side in a tailored charcoal suit, tie knotted with precision. His jaw was tight, his posture as unyielding as stone. To anyone watching, he looked every bit the confident CEO. Only Sophie, close enough to notice the way his fingers tapped against his side, sensed the tension beneath his calm. The judge cleared his throat. "Do you, Daniel Carter, take Sophie Miller to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Daniel's gaze flickered briefly toward Sophie before settling on the judge. "I do." Sophie's turn. Her throat tightened. This wasn't love, wasn't forever, but the words still carried weight. "I do." The gavel tapped softly. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Applause didn't follow, only silence, heavy and surreal. Sophie forced herself to breathe as Daniel slipped a ring onto her finger, cold metal warming against her skin. It was beautiful, too beautiful for what it represented. She whispered under her breath, "Remember my rule." His eyes met hers, unreadable. "I haven't forgotten." Hours later, Sophie's small suitcase rolled across the marble floor of Daniel's penthouse. The place looked like something from a magazine: towering windows, gleaming surfaces, art pieces, worth more than her yearly tuition. She froze just inside the doorway, her reflection multiplied in the glass and chrome. "This is where you'll stay," Daniel said, his tone clipped. He gestured toward a hallway. "Your room is down there. We keep our lives separate outside appearances." Sophie nodded, hugging her backpack close. "Fine by me." She found her assigned room immaculate, every detail calculated for comfort: silk sheets, a view of the skyline, a closet already filled with clothes in her size. It should have felt like paradise. Instead, it felt like a cage lined with velvet. That evening, she found herself at a dining table longer than her entire apartment. A chef she hadn't met served plates with delicate precision. Sophie pushed her food around, appetite lost. Daniel sat at the far end, silent, sipping wine. The distance between them felt more than physical. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why me? Out of everyone you could have chosen, why pick a stranger in a cafe?" He looked up, eyes hard. "Because you didn't know my name. And for once, I wanted someone who saw me as a man, not a balance sheet." Sophie blinked, startled. She hadn't expected honesty. "No," he admitted, "but it makes it bearable." "Oh." Later that night, Sophie wandered into the penthouse's balcony. The city spread out below, neon lights twinkling like restless stars. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering to the wind, "I can survive this. It's just a deal. Just a deal." Inside, Daniel watched from the shadows of the living room. For reasons he couldn't explain, her quiet strength unsettled him more than any hostile takeover ever had. Neither of them realized that the ink on their contract had already begun to blur, smeared not by lawyers or clauses, but by the first cracks of something real. And as the city pulsed beneath them, husband and wife by law but strangers at heart, the question hung in the air. How long could a fake marriage stay fake before truth demanded its place? The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind Sophie could hardly keep up with. Morning fittings, etiquette lessons, endless reminders from Daniel's assistant about how to stand, how to smile, which fork to use at which course. It felt like stepping into a play where everyone knew their lines except her. She tried, though. She practiced walking in heels across the penthouse's polished floors, only to trip once and burst out laughing. The sound startled Daniel, who had walked in mid-practice. He tilted his head, something soft flickering in his eyes before he quickly masked it. "You'll need more training," he said evenly. Sophie grinned, despite herself. "Guess you didn't hire a professional actress." He almost smiled back. Almost. When the first gala arrived, Sophie's heart pounded so loudly she thought the whole ballroom might hear it. Chandeliers spilled golden light across crystal glasses and sequined gowns. Cameras flashed as the city's elite swept through the entrance, murmuring greetings that sounded more like negotiations. Daniel appeared beside her in a sharp black tuxedo, the picture of control. He placed a hand lightly on her back, guiding her forward. "Smile," he murmured. "They're watching." So she did. She smiled, even as her palms sweated, even as her knees trembled beneath the silk gown. She followed him through clusters of guests, nodding politely while names blurred together. Then it happened. A reporter stepped forward, microphone raised, eyes gleaming. "Mrs. Carter," the woman said, voice carrying over the chatter. "How does it feel to marry into one of New York's richest families? Some say it's about the money. What do you say?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sophie froze. Daniel stiffened, his jaw tightening. He opened his mouth, but Sophie raised her hand first. "It feels," she said steadily, "like standing beside a man who carries more on his shoulders than anyone should. Money? It doesn't fix loneliness. It doesn't stop grief. What matters isn't what he owns, it's what he refuses to let break him. If that's why I'm here, then I'm proud of it." Silence fell. Then, unexpectedly, applause broke out from one corner of the room. Sophie blinked, heat rising in her cheeks, but she didn't waver. Daniel's eyes were on her, sharp but unreadable. Later, when the crowd shifted away, he leaned down. "That wasn't in the script." Sophie lifted her chin. "Neither is real life." For the first time, he didn't argue. That night, Long after the gala ended and the penthouse lights dimmed, Sophie slipped onto the balcony, heels dangling from her hand. She watched the city glitter and felt the strange ache of belonging to two worlds, one she had fought in every day, and one she had only just been dragged into. Behind her, the sliding door opened. Daniel stepped out, jacket undone, tie loosened. For once, he didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man carrying too much weight. "My mother smiled tonight," he said quietly, leaning against the railing. "I haven't seen that in months." Sophie glanced at him, her voice softer than she meant. "Then maybe this deal isn't so crazy after all." He turned to her, expression unreadable, as if searching for something in her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the city below filled the silence, and somewhere deep inside both of them, a line blurred. What had begun as a contract was starting to feel like something else, something neither of them dared name, not yet. And as Sophie slipped back inside, Daniel whispered to the night air, "Don't forget the rules, Sophie, because I don't know what happens if I do." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and faint roses. Daniel's mother sat propped up in her bed, her frail hands wrapped around Sophie's. The older woman's eyes, though dimmed by illness, shone with warmth as she studied the girl beside her son. "You're even lovelier in person," she whispered. "Daniel, you've chosen well." Sophie's throat tightened. She wanted to correct the lie, confess that none of this was real. But then she saw the peace in the woman's face, the relief softening the lines of pain, and she couldn't bring herself to destroy it. Instead, she squeezed her hand gently and smiled. Daniel stood silently at the foot of the bed, watching. For a man who conquered boardrooms, he looked utterly powerless here. When his mother drifted into sleep, he pulled Sophie into the hallway. "You handled that better than I could have," he admitted, his voice rough. Sophie searched his face. "She loves you, Daniel. That's all she wants to know. You won't be alone." His jaw worked as though he wanted to argue, but instead he looked away. The following evening, another test came. The Carters were expected at a high-profile charity dinner downtown, a gathering of shareholders and socialites. Sophie braced herself as they entered the glittering ballroom. Chandeliers spilled light over polished marble, and the scent of expensive perfume hung in the air. Halfway through the evening, a minor crisis struck. A powerful investor's wife tripped near the stage, her glass shattering across the floor. Gasps swept the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sophie was there, kneeling quickly, helping the woman to her feet, brushing glass aside with her bare hands before staff rushed over. "It's all right," Sophie murmured to the woman, her touch steady, her smile calming. The crowd watched. Whispers shifted. By the time Sophie returned to Daniel's side, eyes were following her with something new respect. Daniel leaned closer, his voice low. "You realize you just won over half this room?" Sophie smirked faintly. "Guess I didn't need your script after all." For once, he didn't try to control the moment. Instead, he studied her, as though seeing her differently for the first time. Later that night, when the chauffeured car pulled away from the hotel, Sophie leaned against the window, exhaustion catching up with her. The city blurred past in streaks of light. Daniel's gaze lingered on her reflection in the glass, her hair loose from its pins, her lips parted in a tired sigh. Back at the penthouse, she slipped out to the balcony again, heels dangling from her fingers. Daniel followed, the night breeze tugging at his undone tie. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked, voice quieter than usual. Sophie turned, startled. "You know why? For my brother. For the debt. For—" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Because your mother deserves peace." Daniel studied her, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're stronger than I thought." Sophie tilted her head. "And maybe you're not as untouchable as you pretend." The words hung between them, sharp and honest. For the first time, Daniel didn't look away. And for the first time, Sophie wondered if this contract had already crossed into something no clause could contain. In the quiet of that balcony, high above the city, both of them felt the shift subtle, undeniable, and far more dangerous than they had ever planned. The city had quieted into the low hum of midnight when Sophie slipped into the guest room of the penthouse. She set her heels by the door, her bare feet grateful for the cool hardwood floor. Yet her thoughts refused to rest. The image of Daniel at the hospital earlier, the way his voice had cracked when he spoke to his mother, replayed again and again. He wasn't just a CEO with sharp edges, he was a son afraid of loss. Across the hall, Daniel stood by his window, staring at the skyline. Deals and deadlines usually filled his mind at this hour, but tonight, all he could see was Sophie kneeling on marble, helping that investor's wife without hesitation. He poured a glass of water, the scotch bottle untouched. For the first time in years, alcohol felt like an escape he didn't want. The next morning, Sophie found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, making coffee. It was such a startlingly normal image that she froze. "You drink this?" she asked, half teasing. He looked up, one brow raised. "I am human, you know." She smiled despite herself, pouring her own cup. For a brief moment, the penthouse felt less like a stage and more like a home. Later that day, Daniel drove her to visit his mother again. The older woman's strength was fading, but her spirit hadn't. When she asked Sophie about her dreams, Sophie hesitated, then admitted softly, "I always wanted to be a nurse, to help people who couldn't help themselves." Daniel's mother touched her hand, her eyes warm. "That's a calling, dear. Don't ever lose it." Daniel watched silently, a strange tightness in his chest. Sophie wasn't just filling a role for his mother, she was giving her genuine comfort, something even he struggled to do. That evening, back at the penthouse, the rain began to fall, streaking the wide glass windows. Sophie wandered into Daniel's study, curious. Books lined the shelves, but on his desk lay a photograph, slightly worn. A young Daniel, much younger, with his mother at some charity gala years ago. She picked it up gently. "I didn't know you kept things like this," she said when Daniel walked in. He paused, watching her fingers trace the frame. "Some things you don't let go of, even when you want to." Their eyes met, and for a moment, silence stretched between them, charged and fragile. Sophie set the photo down quickly, heart racing. That night, Daniel found her on the balcony again, rain misting the air. She was wrapped in a blanket, watching lightning split the clouds. "You always come out here," he said quietly, stepping beside her. "It's the only place up here that feels real," she answered. He studied her profile in the stormlight. "What are you so afraid of, Sophie?" She exhaled slowly, words tumbling before she could stop them. "I'm afraid of being nothing more than a paycheck. Afraid that when this ends, I'll disappear from your life like I never mattered." The truth startled them both. Daniel reached out, almost without thinking, and touched her hand. "You matter," he said, voice low but firm. Sophie's chest tightened. For a second, she wanted to believe him. But she pulled her hand back gently, reminding herself of the rule. "Don't break the contract, Daniel," she whispered, "because I don't know what happens if you do." The storm raged outside, but inside both of them knew the real danger wasn't thunder or lightning. It was how much they were starting to need each other. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in Daniel's penthouse the next morning. Sophie dressed quickly, preparing for another day of carefully constructed appearances. She tied her hair back, her hands trembling more than usual. Something had shifted on that balcony, something she wasn't ready to name. By afternoon, the two of them stood together at another charity function, this one smaller, but crowded with shareholders and business rivals. Cameras flashed, and whispers followed them as they moved through the glittering room. Sophie held her head high, but she could feel eyes watching, measuring, waiting for her to stumble. Halfway through the evening, the trap was sprung. On the far side of the ballroom, a journalist unfolded a glossy magazine and waved it like a trophy. "Mr. Carter," he called out loudly, "care to comment on this?" The room hushed. On the cover was a headline splashed in bold. "The Fake Bride, CEO's Marriage a Lie?" Below, grainy photos of Sophie leaving her old apartment, bills tucked under her arm, paired with captions that painted her as a gold digger. Gasps rippled across the floor. A few guests exchanged knowing glances. Someone laughed cruelly. Sophie froze, blood draining from her face. She felt exposed, humiliated, stripped bare in front of strangers who didn't know her story. Her rule, the one promise she demanded respect, was collapsing before her eyes. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. He stepped forward, ready to shut it down, but Sophie shook her head, eyes glistening. "Don't," she whispered. "If you couldn't protect me from this, there's nothing left to say." Her voice cracked, but her spine stayed straight. She turned and walked quickly through the crowd, heels striking marble like drumbeats of defiance. Cameras clicked as she disappeared through the doors. Daniel's chest burned. For years, he had managed scandals, silenced rumors, manipulated headlines. But this was different. This was Sophie, and she was walking away not because of lies printed on paper, but because he had failed to shield her when she trusted him most. He left the event moments later, ignoring the calls of investors and reporters. His car sped through the city streets, headlights carving paths through the darkness. At the penthouse, Sophie's room was empty, her suitcase gone. The silence inside the massive home was deafening. He poured a glass of water, staring out over the skyline. For once, New York glittered without meaning. Sophie's words replayed in his mind. If you couldn't protect me, there's nothing left to say. In a modest motel across town, Sophie curled up on a creaky bed, clutching her phone. She couldn't call her brother, she refused to worry him. She couldn't go back to her old apartment, her landlord had already rented it out. She felt like she was floating between worlds, belonging to neither. Tears stung her eyes, but she bit them back. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry for a man who only saw her as a solution. Still, her chest ached with the truth Daniel had begun to mean more than the contract. And now, it was over. Back in his penthouse, Daniel set the untouched glass aside and pressed his palms against the cold window. For the first time in his life, the empire he had built felt worthless. What good was power if he couldn't hold on to the one person who saw him as more than a CEO? In that silence, he made a decision. If he wanted Sophie back, it couldn't be as part of a deal, a contract, or a lie. It had to be real. The game had changed. And Daniel Carter was ready to fight, not for his company, not for his image, but for the woman who had walked into a cafe with nothing and left carrying his heart. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Papers piled on his desk, his phone buzzing with calls from investors demanding explanations, but he ignored them all. His mind was fixed on Sophie the way she had looked at him before walking out, the tremor in her voice when she said there was nothing left to say. By dawn, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't buy her back with money. He couldn't draft another contract. This time, he had to show her the truth. 2 weeks later, Sophie sat in the back of a crowded subway car, clutching a worn sketchbook she used to calm her mind. She had picked up shifts at a diner, barely enough to cover a room in a shared apartment. Her world had shrunk again, and yet her thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel, his mother's kind smile, his steady voice, the way his hand had lingered on hers that night in the storm. She shook her head, forcing the memories away. It was over. That evening, she returned from work to find an envelope slipped under her door. Her name written in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. Inside was a single card. Come to Westbridge Gallery, tonight, one last time. Her chest tightened. She told herself not to go, that it was another trick, another performance. And yet, as the hours passed, her feet carried her there anyway. The gallery doors opened into warm light and hushed silence. Sophie froze. Across the walls hung canvases sketches she recognized instantly. Her drawings, pages from her battered sketchbook, framed and displayed with care. At the center of the room stood Daniel, waiting. His suit was simple this time. No boardroom armor, just a man stripped of excuses. I told myself I could keep this as a contract, he said quietly, his voice carrying in the stillness. But the truth is, I broke your rule. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. Sophie's breath caught. She looked around at the walls again. Her art elevated beyond anything she could have imagined. You did this? He nodded. I wanted the world to see you the way I do. Strong, honest, worth more than every dollar in my name. Her eyes burned. Why, Daniel? Why now? Because losing you showed me the cost of every lie I ever told. I don't want a deal. I want a life. With you. For a long moment, silence hung between them, the weight of the past weeks pressing down. Then Sophie stepped closer, her voice breaking. I never wanted your money. I just wanted to matter. You matter, he whispered, eyes shining. More than anyone ever has. The gallery seemed to vanish around them, leaving only two people standing at the center of a choice, no longer bound by ink or signatures, but by the possibility of something real. The gallery was silent except for the sound of Sophie's breath, shaky but steadying with each second. Daniel stood before her, no contract in hand, no armor of wealth to shield him. Just a man asking for a chance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, the light caught a ring, unlike the one she wore from their courthouse vows. This one was simple, elegant, with a single diamond set in gold, timeless, not flashy. "I don't want you to wear a symbol of a deal," Daniel said, his voice low but certain. "I want you to wear a promise. No contracts. No conditions. Just love, if you'll have me." Sophie's chest tightened. She remembered the day he'd slid a ring on her finger, under fluorescent courthouse lights, how cold and unreal it had felt. But this moment, standing among her own art displayed because he believed in her, felt alive. Tears stung her eyes as she whispered, "You're breaking every rule we made." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then let's make new ones. Together." She stared at him, at the man she once thought untouchable, now stripped of every shield. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes." Applause echoed suddenly. Sophie startled, then turned to see a small group at the edge of the gallery, Daniel's mother, pale but radiant in her wheelchair, surrounded by nurses. She had insisted on being there. Her eyes shone with tears as she whispered, "I knew it. I knew you two were meant for each other." Sophie rushed to her side, taking her fragile hand. "We'll take care of him," she promised softly. Daniel's mother smiled, content. "That's all I ever wanted." Weeks later, the sound of laughter filled a sunlit garden where close friends and a handful of family gathered. There was no towering cathedral, no magazine covers, just a simple ceremony beneath white blossoms, the air scented with spring. Sophie walked down the aisle in a gown she had chosen herself, her sketchbook tucked into her bouquet as a reminder of where she began. Daniel waited for her, eyes locked on hers, every trace of pride stripped away except for the pride of standing with her. When they exchanged vows, there were no conditions, no pretenses, just two voices promising a life together. As they kissed, the crowd cheered, and Sophie felt the weight of the past months lift. What had started as a bargain in a rainy cafe had become the greatest truth of her life. Later, as they walked hand in hand through the gallery that now bore her name, Daniel whispered against her ear, "Best mistake we ever made." Sophie laughed, her heart light. "No," she corrected softly. "Best contract we ever tore apart." And with that, they stepped into their future not as CEO and fake bride, but as two souls who had found real love in the unlikeliest of places.